This story kicks off in a time that straight up shattered my world. I was married, and like any couple, we started out on a good note. Things were going smooth, like really smooth. We had that vibe, you know? My wife and I were all about making plans, dreaming about the life we'd build together. We imagined everything. The cozy home filled with our kids' laughter, late night talks, vacations, just living that dream life, man. It felt like nothing could go wrong, like we had it all figured out. But then, everything flipped on its head when our son was born. What should have been the happiest day of our lives? Yeah, not so much. From the minute he entered the world, we were hit with the harsh truth that the future we dreamed up, it was gone. Gone in an instant. Our little boy came into this world with some serious health issues. The doctors didn't sugarcoat it either. Cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, kidney problems, and a heart defect. It felt like every word was a punch straight to the gut. The future we thought we had? It turned into an endless battle. Sleepless nights, stress on another level, and the constant fear of what was coming next. The helplessness was unreal. Watching your kid struggle, knowing there's not a damn thing you can do to fix it, is a kind of pain that just tears you apart inside. My wife and I were drowning in it, man. We were constantly on edge, scared out of our minds, unsure how to deal with all this. It was like being thrown into a storm without a lifeboat, and we were just sinking deeper and deeper. Man, I don't even know why, but deep down, I always kind of felt like my wife blamed me for how our son turned out. Like, there was this weird vibe between us, you know? She never came right out and said it, but it was there, lurking in the background, like this unspoken thing. It was heavy, like a storm cloud just hanging over us, and I could feel it. Maybe she couldn't handle the hand we'd been dealt. I mean, hell, neither of us were ready for what life threw at us, but her pain, it felt different. It felt like blame. But no matter what, we both loved our boy more than anything. And despite all the odds, all the doctor's grim talks about how weak he was and how short his life would be, he made it 12 whole years. Those years were tough as hell, man. It was like living in and out of hospitals, going through endless treatments, dealing with pain, for him and for us. But there were these little moments, brief as they were, where he'd smile or just hold on a little tighter, and it made all the fighting worth it. We fought hard, and so did he, with everything he had. But, life has this way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. A year and a half before our boy passed, I found out something that hit me like a ton of bricks. My wife, the woman I thought I was in this with, the one I shared all this pain and hope with, she had someone else. I can still remember the exact moment I found out, like everything went cold. It didn't even feel real at first. How could she do that? We were living in this nightmare together, but it turns out she had already checked out, living in a whole other world where I didn't even exist. There wasn't some huge blowout fight. No yelling, no screaming, none of that drama. I just quietly packed up her stuff, placed her bags by the door, and told her, if this is what you want, if you're that unhappy, go ahead. But our son? He stays with me. You're not taking him. She didn't say much, just stood there, looking kind of stunned, maybe even guilty. I don't know if it was the weight of everything finally hitting her or what, but in that moment, there was this silent understanding between us. She stayed, though, for our kid. For him, she promised it was over with that guy. Said she was confused, made a mistake. We tried to make it work, or at least we tried to pretend we were okay. But let's be real, nothing was ever the same. That trust? It was shattered. Still, for our boy, we kept going, fighting together to give him the best life we could. Then, about a year and a half later, everything just fell apart. Our son didn't make it. He had heart surgery. The doctors said it was necessary, and at first, it seemed like everything went fine. We were hopeful, like, finally, maybe things were turning around. But then the complications hit. A few days later, he was gone. He never woke up. After fighting for so long, it all ended in the blink of an eye. I was wrecked. It's like my whole world just collapsed, and no amount of comfort or support could pull me out of that black hole. We buried him. That was the hardest day of my life, man. I thought nothing could hurt worse than losing him, but life had one more punch to throw. Not even a month after we laid him to rest, my wife walked out. She didn't even give me time to grieve properly. Packed her stuff and left, just like that. And guess where she went? Right back to him. The same guy. She didn't even try to hide it. Just left me drowning in all that pain alone. When she left, man, I couldn't have cared less. It's like, at that point, I was already numb to everything. Her walking out the door didn't even register because the real pain, the thing that tore me apart, was losing my son. That's what crushed me. That's what I couldn't get past. It wasn't her betrayal that broke me. It was his death. After he was gone, it felt like the world just stopped making any sense. I was completely wrecked, shattered beyond repair. I couldn't handle it, couldn't move on, couldn't do anything but drown in that loss. So, I started drinking. Hard. Every night. It was just me and the bottle, trying to numb that pain, trying to block out the overwhelming grief that was tearing me up inside. Drinking became my escape, the only way to turn off the noise in my head, even if just for a few hours. Day after day, I was spiraling, sinking deeper into the abyss, and honestly, I didn't care. If I burned out from the booze, so be it. I was already dead inside. If it weren't for one crazy twist of fate, I probably would have drunk myself into the ground. One night, after another long, soul-sucking day at work, I stopped by the store to grab a couple of bottles. You know, just to keep the numbness going. Same routine, nothing special. I was just trying to drown the pain, same as always. But then, out of nowhere, life threw me this wild curveball. As I'm standing there in the liquor aisle, my eyes land on this familiar face. I blinked, and yeah, it was Jessica. We went to school together. But back then, man, we were on totally different paths. She was the smart one, the overachiever, always knowing what she wanted in life. And me? I was the guy who barely kept it together, partying more than studying, not really giving a damn about the future. We were worlds apart, practically living on different planets. We hardly ever crossed paths back then. But here we were, years later, standing in the same store. And it caught me so off guard I didn't even know what to say at first. Jessica, man, she was in a bad way when I ran into her. Honestly, she might have even been worse off than me, and that's saying something. I was drowning in my own grief, barely keeping it together. But Jess? She'd been through hell and back. She was dealing with some serious health issues, and she'd had a miscarriage that wrecked her. That alone would be enough to break anyone. But her husband? Dude up and left her right after the miscarriage, just bailed when she needed him the most. She was shattered, trying to pick up the pieces, going through treatment for her depression, fighting her own battles with her body and mind. It was like life just kept piling it on, one blow after another. When I saw her that day in the store, she didn't even look like the same girl I remembered. The fire she used to have in her eyes? Gone. She was just as lost and broken as I was. And honestly, it felt like fate, like we were meant to cross paths at that exact moment. There was no other way to explain it. Two broken people, each carrying their own scars, somehow found each other in the middle of all that wreckage. It wasn't some fairy tale reunion. It was raw, messy, and real. But that's what made it work. We weren't perfect, but we were exactly what the other needed at that time. Jess became my lifeline, and in some crazy way, I was hers too. We gave each other something to hold on to when everything else had fallen apart. And somehow, through all the pain and chaos, we managed to start picking up the pieces of our lives together, little by little. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't pretty, but we were there for each other when no one else was. That's what saved us both. We started hanging out more, just talking at first, and before I knew it, Jess ended up in the hospital again. Her health was still rough, and I couldn't stay away. I found myself visiting her every day, just needing to be around her. It's funny, I didn't even notice when I stopped drinking. One day, it hit me. I hadn't touched a bottle in weeks. It wasn't some big decision or anything. It's just that Jess became my whole world, man. Every moment I wasn't with her felt like a waste of time. I lived for those visits. Everything else just faded into the background. When she finally got out of the hospital, we started seeing each other more often. It was like she brought a light into my life that I didn't even know I needed. Every day with her felt like something worth getting up for. And before long, we decided to move in together. It wasn't some big plan. It just kind of happened naturally. We fit. For the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe things were going to be okay. A year went by, and we got married. It was a small thing, but man, it was huge for me. I never thought I'd feel like that again. That kind of happiness. But the real miracle? That came a year later when Jess got pregnant. I remember that day like it was yesterday. We were just sitting on the couch, and she handed me the test. We both just broke down crying, holding each other tight. There were no words for what that moment meant to us. After everything we'd been through, after all the pain and loss, it felt like the universe was finally throwing us a lifeline. It's hard to explain how big that was for us, how much it meant. We'd been through hell, and here we were, finally given something beautiful, something worth fighting for. A lot of time's passed since then, man. It feels like a whole different lifetime now. We've got two boys, yeah, two. Our oldest is 15, and the younger one's 13. They're turning into young men right before our eyes, and damn, if they don't make me proud every single day. It's wild to think how far we've come, how different things could have been. When I look at our sons, I can't help but feel like the luckiest guy in the world. They've become the center of our universe, the reason Jess and I keep pushing through. My relationship with Jess, it's on another level, man. I've never felt anything like this before. Not with my ex-wife, not with anyone. What we have is deeper than anything I've ever known. It's not just love, it's this crazy connection, like we're two halves of the same soul. We get each other without even saying a word. There's this unspoken understanding between us that's hard to explain unless you've been there yourself. It's like we're in sync in a way that I didn't even think was possible. Sometimes, I think back to that day we ran into each other in the store. If I hadn't gone in there, if we hadn't reconnected, man, I don't even want to think about where we'd be right now. I probably wouldn't even be here, to be honest. We both could have drifted away, broken and alone, without ever knowing what we were missing. But fate had other plans, and I still can't believe how lucky I got. Looking back now, it's crystal clear. Without her, I wouldn't have a life. She's not just my wife. She's my everything. I can't even imagine a world without Jess by my side. And the crazy part? She feels the same way. After all these years, we still live like it's just us and the kids against the world. No one else matters, just us. We've built something real, something solid, something that's worth more than anything I could have ever dreamed of. Life's funny like that, man. You go through all the pain, all the heartache, and somehow, you come out the other side with something beautiful. It wasn't easy, but looking at where we are now, I'd do it all over again in a heartbeat. Through all the struggles, we found our happiness.